Hey, lady. Here we go. Yeah. See, now I'm not hurting her, but she doesn't know what's going on here. There's this big animal that's reaching for her. All right. Let's try again. Okay, you flip over. See, I want to handle her from her back because that's the gentlest. She wants to give me her feet because that's how these birds protect themselves. Their feet are very powerful. They have very sharp talons. And she wants to get her talons between herself and me. Hello, lady. Here she is. Okay? Now, the first thing we're going to do with this bird, and we're going to call this bird number 2, because as Mr. Foster already told you, we already banded one and put it back on the ledge so that Mom and Dad would be a little bit more calm. We're going to weigh this bird. And if you would kindly let go of my foot, we'll get your full weight. Okay. There you go. This bird is 690 grams. 690. Okay. Here we go. And what we're going to do is, as I told you, the main thing we're doing here is banding the birds, but while we have the birds, we like to give them a medical exam to make sure that they're nice and healthy. So I'm looking in her throat right now, and I'm looking for an infection called trichomoniasis, and it looks nice and clean. She's nice and healthy. Okay? So there's no trichomoniasis in her throat. You can just write down that her throat is clean. I'm looking at her eyes. Her eyes are nice and bright and shiny. Okay? So that's important. I'm going to check her ears. Flies can lay eggs in their ears, and maggots grow in their ears. Sounds gross, doesn't it? Well, you want to know what? It is pretty gross. And so we'll just check and make sure. What I'm doing is just kind of feeling over her ears. They don't have external ears like we do. There's a little hole in there leading to their inner ear, and their ears are good. There's nothing in there. Okay? The next thing I'm going to do is check for muscular development, and I'm just feeling her breast muscles. Those are their flight muscles. And in birds, those flight muscles, just the muscles on the chest, can be about 1/3 to 1/2 of the weight of a whole bird. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? And that's what allows them to fly as powerfully as they do. And that feels good. That development is going nicely. I'm going to check her feet. Now you hear her yelling. As I mentioned, I'm not hurting her, but she doesn't know what's going on. She has grabbed my watch. I'm going to hand her to Officer Dukoski, and he's going to hold her while I do the rest of this. Her feet look good. Sometimes there can be problems with her development, but those are good. I'm going to check her vent. And the vent looks nice and clean. Okay. So we're ready to go. I'm going to check with a leg gauge as well and see how big her legs are. Since we know that this is a female, well, it fits in number 6, doesn't it? You know what? I've been calling this a girl, but you're a boy, aren't you? Okay? I'm going by several factors here. The males and females look almost identical, but there are very subtle differences. Looking at his face, I thought that looked like a female. It's just a slight difference in the shape of the face. But at the age of this bird, these birds are 24 to 28 days old because they hatched over a 4-day period. At this age, a female should weigh more than this. Also, the size of the tarsus. This is just part of their leg. That's the right size for a male. It's too small for a female. And also the feet. Females have larger feet than that. So there are three things that tell me that this is a male. One thing tells me it might be a female. So this is a male. And why is that important? Because since males and females are different sizes, we need to put different size bands on them so that they'll fit. Okay, now that we know that, I will pick a band of the right size for this bird. That is a unique number. It's going on this bird, and it won't go on any other bird, so that if anybody finds this bird, they can read that number, report it to us, report it to the United States Bird Banding Laboratory, give the number, and they'll pull up the information and they'll say, oh, that bird was banded at the Rachel Carson building on Thursday, May 27th, 2010. So we'll tell them how old it is, where it came from, and so forth. I'm going to put a piece of color-coded tape on this as well, so that as you watch these birds on the Nest camera in the coming weeks, and as volunteers in the local area watch these birds, even after they start to fly, they won't have to try to read that 9-digit number, which would be impossible unless you have the bird in your hand. They can just look at it and see the white tape and say, oh, that's white, and then we'll know which bird it is. So I'm putting a little piece of white tape over that band. And then, of course, to read that number, someone would have to peel this tape off. But this you can see from the ground, and we'll know which bird it is. Yes, you got quite a voice there, don't you? Why aren't Mom and Dad coming? Okay, now that 9-digit number, the only way that you would have a chance of reading that number is if you're holding the bird in your hand. And that can happen sometimes. Unfortunately, if the bird is found injured or dead, and you're holding it in your hands, you can read that number. But what about if the bird is alive, living, free, nesting on a cliff or a building or a bridge somewhere, and you're able to see it with your binoculars or a telescope, but you don't have it in your hands? How can you tell what bird that is? For that reason, we're putting another band on the left leg. And you can see those numbers. Maybe those of you in the front row can even read that. Can you read that in the front row?
Yes.
35 over S, that's correct. And it's also color-coded. So without even reading the numbers, you can tell from this color code, well, people on the street wouldn't know, but we know. This color code means it comes from the northeastern United States. And then that number tells us which bird it is. Okay? So that for live birds living free, you can read that and report it to us, and we'll be able to tell you where that bird came from. And that's how we know where Mom and Dad here at Rachel Carson came from. It's because of these color-coded bands that we know that the female that's nesting here came from the nest on the Girard Point Bridge in Philadelphia in 1998. And then the male that's nesting here came from the Walt Whitman Bridge in Philadelphia, from a nest in 2003. That's by reading the color-coded bands. Now that's a bit unusual that both parents would come from the same city and even from the same state, but that's just the way it happens. Our other nesters here come from as far away as Wisconsin and Canada and Virginia. Does anybody know what the word peregrine means? It means wanderer. These birds will fly great distances in order to nest. Okay, so we're done with this bird.
Hey, Art, before we bring the second bird out, I would like to mention how the great